I'm most drawn to self-portraiture because it's so personal, because I've always found self-portraiture to be a kind of therapy. If I'm going through a very strong negative or positive emotion, I can go out and kind of create art from it. And I know plenty of people do that in other ways that do not involve using themselves as the subject. I think it just adds an element. I mean, even if it's just an element of surprise, which I think is what it is for a lot of people, they look at my work and they say, oh, that would be a really pretty picture, even without you in it. And I kind of want to challenge them and say, yes, but what does it do for you with the human element?
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 417 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. I'm your host, Matt Payne, and I'm so excited to bring you another inspiring conversation about photography and the creative journeys that shape us. This week, I'm joined by Sara Kushner, a talented self-portrait photographer who has been honing her craft for an impressive 16 years. Sara's work goes far beyond simply putting herself in the frame. It's deeply introspective, emotionally charged, and intricately connected to her personal journey. Her unique perspective offers so much for us to learn about using photography as a tool for storytelling, self-expression, and healing. In this episode, we dive into Sara's fascinating journey as a self-portrait photographer, why she was drawn to this specific style, and how her creative process unfolds. We also explore how her personal life and professional work as a dietitian intersect with her art and her plans to combine these passions in future workshops. Sara opens up about the challenges of navigating judgment in a space often associated with influencers, as well as the deeper goals that she strives to achieve through her photography. This conversation is a must-listen for anyone curious about the power of self-portraiture or seeking ways to bring more authenticity to their work. So, settle in and join me as I chat with Sara Kushner. All right, Sara Kushner, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for this conversation because I think we're going to cover some topics that are somewhat controversial in the photography space, but also I'm really excited to hear more about kind of the creative side of what you're up to. Let's kick this off by you telling us a little bit about who the heck Sara Kushner is.
Great question, Matt. Well, I am a self-portrait photographer. I'm also an anti-diet registered dietitian. I like to, do a lot of things all at one time. I live in Seattle, Washington with my husband and about 15 houseplants. I'm a synchronized swimmer. That's kind of a fun fact. I know people make that face when I tell them, which is cool. Gosh, that makes me sound like I'm so boring. Like I only do those few things. I'm an avid reader. I love reading fantasy books and other books. Those are honestly probably the main things to know about me.
My wife sets a goal every year to read books, and I think this year her goal was 500, and she's like 5 away for the year or something like that.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well that makes my goal of 30 sound like nothing. So
yeah,
that's
I mean,
amazing.
To be fair, she's a freak show reader, like crazy fast.
Does she listen and read? Like does she want them both?
Yes, she does.
That's crazy. Yeah, that is. I have a friend actually who's similar to that, whose goal I think is like multiple hundreds. I don't know how many. She listens to books at something like 2.5 speed. She played one for me and I was like, my brain cannot compute this information.
Not that the podcast is about that, but I often listen to podcasts at different speeds, and I encourage, because of the cadence of my voice, I encourage our listeners to do the same because I'm a fairly slow talker. Mm-hmm. And I think I read a study that the brain can't comprehend anything faster than 2x. Anything beyond that, the brain like is filling in words and stuff like that. So I'm usually at like 1.5 when I listen to stuff.
All right. Well, your listeners might have to do some intense thinking during this podcast episode because I am not a slow talker. I will do my best, but it's really hard for me.
And now we have discovered the problem with my recommendation. All right, Sara. So real quick, in your intro, you said you're an anti-diet dietitian, which sounds kind of like an oxymoron. What does that even mean?
That's a really good question. I appreciate you asking that. It means that I don't believe in diets, meaning any sort of restriction of food intake. So I don't believe in low carb, low fat, any of the named diets. I don't believe in intentional weight loss. There's a lot of research to support that intentional weight loss actually does more harm than good over time. And it's just not necessary. I'm a fat positive dietitian, you might say. I work with people in all sized bodies, and I think they're all beautiful and worthy of respect and love, and they can all be healthy. If any of your listeners have heard of the Health at Every Size movement, maybe not because they're photographers, but it is a science-backed idea that health and weight are not actually linked, at least not in the way that people or society think that they are. So you can be perfectly healthy in a fat body, in a thin body, in a medium-sized body. And I just know, from personal and professional experience that kind of going against your body's sort of innate way of being is harmful more than it is helpful. So I help people, recover their relationship with food. I help them move towards intuitive eating. I help them recover from eating disorders and work on body image. So I'm a dietitian. People think of that as like anti-health. People hear that and they're like, oh, so you're just promoting like people eating candy all the time. And like, you can eat candy whenever you want, but that is not what I promote. So yes, hopefully that is a good short answer to your question, because I could talk about that for like a whole other podcast episode.
Well, I'm pretty sure we've got some questions lined up that'll give you the opportunity to get a little bit deeper into that. So before we go there, maybe tell us a little bit about how you got into photography to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that people ask me that sometimes, and every single time I feel like I have to think about it, which is funny. It was so long ago that it takes me a second to recall, when was the first time that I ever held a camera? And I think the reason it's so hard for me to think of is because it really has always been this magnetic pull. I have never not liked photography that I can remember. I mean, once I learned what it was, my dad had, an old digital camera, an old film camera, just stuff that I would play around with and take photos of anything and everything, like my hand or like, the beach, like wherever I was, I just like had to have a camera in my hand basically for as long as I can remember. Once I got my first camera was a point and shoot that I got in middle school, and it was basically attached to me. I mean, I would go to school and like take a whole album's worth of photos at lunchtime. I literally remember posting on Facebook one time an album called Wednesday at Lunch. It was just photos of me and my friends at lunch. They were not artistic in any way, but as soon as I had the opportunity to sign up for a photography class in high school, I, sped my way over there and basically never stopped. Yeah, so I guess the answer is it just felt really natural, just felt like a thing I had to do. I don't know, I have a hard time explaining why, but it just felt right.
And how would you describe the subject matter that you're currently most interested in?
It's a good question. Also funny because of what this whole episode is about. But I am a self-portrait photographer. That is definitely my biggest interest right now and has been since high school. So I hesitate to say me because I don't really think my self-portraits are all about me. I think they're about the landscape and the environment, and I'm just sort of a part of that. A part of that, I guess, that is living like a tree or, like the ocean, like anything else, just in a different way. But I have, I have this strong love of self-portraiture, and that is what I'm focusing on right now.
Well, that was succinct. Okay. So let's dive a little bit more into that. So my understanding is that you've been doing self-portrait photography for about 16 years now, not to date when you were in high school, but there you go.
Okay,
People can figure that out. And I'm curious, what's that journey looked like for you? Like, what's the timeline in terms of how it started and kind of what you've evolved towards what you're doing now?
I took my first ever self-portrait that I can remember as part of a photography assignment. I think the assignment was called Headless portraiture, and it was any sort of portrait where you couldn't see the subject's head. So whether it was that you cut it off, whether it was that you hid it, I did one where I had a friend put on a hoodie backwards and put the hood up so that you couldn't see her face. And then I ended up taking a self-portrait where I had really long, my hair's still pretty long, but I had like much longer hair at the time, and I wrapped it around my face and I stood with my back to the garage and I took a photo of me, and that was one of my headless portraits. And that was really just an experiment, getting creative, testing the boundaries of photography with this assignment, which of course is what photography class is for. And then shortly after that, this would have been, I guess, my junior year of high school, I was on Flickr. Maybe you were too. Maybe a lot of your listeners were back in the day.
Still am.
Still are. Okay. I haven't posted on Flickr in a long time, but this was, back when Instagram didn't exist. And so we were all making friends on Flickr and we were all sharing our photos, and people would like highlight a little like wave and be like, oh, that's so cute. And it was just very supportive and felt like a community. And a lot of people that I followed on Flickr, I just noticed self-portraiture kind of popping up more. And I decided to join the masses. And by masses, I mean like 3 people that I knew who were doing this and do a 365 project. And so I attempted to take one self-portrait a day for a year. I think with missing days here and there, I got to 220 something. I don't remember the exact number, which felt like a success for me. Consistency is not something that is my particular strong suit, but I was really proud to do that project, and I really experimented. I mean, I took my photos, in the backyard. I remember one time I was on my way to a friend's house to hang out with some people, and I was running late, and it was in the evening, and I hadn't taken my photo yet for the day, so I pulled the car out and like parked it in the driveway with the headlights on, and then I like squatted down in front of one of the headlights and made that like my backlighting, and I took a photo of me like literally squatting on the ground with like exhaust from the car like coming in the photo, and that was one of my photos. So I was very experimental. I did a lot of like wrapping myself in Christmas lights, like just very like, what can I do? How do I do this? And so yeah, ever since then I've gone in and out of it, but that was really the start, was just kind of doing this thing with friends for fun. Like how many photos can I take? How can I make each one a little bit different?
I love that you did a 365 project. That's the exact challenge I gave myself when I bought my first DSLR back in 2011. I was like, man, what's the best way to learn photography? It's to take a lot of pictures in a lot of different styles of a lot of different subjects, using a lot of weird techniques, and see what sticks, and see what you like, see what you don't like, see what works, see what doesn't work. So it's like a really great way to discover yourself as a photographer and learn about what your preferences are and kind of what techniques resonate most with you and things like that. And it pushes your boundaries. And obviously it's not just something you can do as a beginner too. You could do it as someone who's been doing it for 20 years, right? Like you'll probably still get something out of it.
Yeah. I actually did just finish just 2 days ago my most recent project, which was not a 365, but it was something that I called my seasons project. I made it up myself. And I didn't want a 365 because now that I'm an adult, I have a job, I have TV to watch. I don't know. I didn't want to take a photo every single day of the year. And my style has evolved, and I know that I don't always have access to the type of landscapes where I like to shoot, and I didn't want to put that pressure on myself, but I did do, it was 30 photos every season for a year. So I started with winter last year and ended with fall this year. And I did do 100% of the project. So apparently 120 total photos. It's a lot more realistic than 365, but I'm definitely still, 16 plus years into this, still really like projects and pushing myself and challenging myself. So yes, I agree.
You mentioned just now that you have landscapes that you have a preference for putting yourself into as a self-portrait photographer. Maybe describe what those landscapes look like.
Gosh, I guess my first instinct is to tell you to like look at a map of any national park and kind of just choose your place, because I don't want to say I'm not picky. I'm actually quite picky when it comes to like composition and all that, but just beautiful places. So if I'm low on time and I'm just wanting to take something, or if I was doing it for my project, or if I just want to like express some emotion, something I'm going through, I will run up to one of the parks near my house. So my options usually are the beach or the woods or a field occasionally. Those are kind of the general categories of places where I'll go to shoot. If I'm really going for, if I'm traveling for the sake of photography, or if I'm really wanting to create something a little bit more fantastical or magical sort of feeling, then definitely Mount Rainier National Park is one of my favorite places in the whole world. Any of the 3 in Washington, North Cascades, Olympic, but really anywhere that has mountains. That's sort of my preference for location, is a mountainous sort of area. So January of this year, I was in Banff in Canada, which was just fantastic, and I can't wait to go back. Yeah, but anywhere that's sort of natural and vast is on the table.
That sounds amazing. Right up my alley. Mountains is my jam too. So that's awesome. So why self-portrait photography? What is it about that particular style that you're so drawn to?
I think I'm most drawn to self-portraiture because it's so personal, because I've always found self-portraiture to be a kind of therapy. If I'm going through a very strong negative or positive emotion, I can go out and kind of create art from it. And I know plenty of people do that in other ways that do not involve using themselves as the subject. But I don't know. I mean, I grew up a synchronized swimmer, as I said. I did not actually think that fact would become relevant, but here we are. A dancer, I'm very into artistic sports. That's even now as an adult. Like, I still synchronize swim and I do aerial hoop and I just do all this weird stuff that makes me kind of use my body as the art and, in an athletic way. And it just feels so natural to me to kind of let that bleed into my photography. I think I also like the way that it looks. I think landscape photography is beautiful, and I'm looking at all your photos behind you and I'm just really in awe and thinking, like, when can I go to those places? And, and I would love to have any of those hanging on my wall. And my own art that I create, I think having myself in it adds something. I think it just adds an element. I mean, even if it's just an element of surprise, which I think is what it is for a lot of people. They look at my work and they say, oh, that would be a really pretty picture even without you in it. And I kind of want to challenge them and say, yes, but what does it do for you with the human element? What does it do, to have this like beautiful, but also stark and hard and full of lines landscape? What does it do to you to add somebody who can express with like the shape of their hands or hair moving in the wind or, whatever it is. So I think it's partially that it is personal. I think I've always been somewhat of a rebel. I've always kind of gone against the grain a little bit with a lot of the ways that I live my life. And I think this is just another way that I like to kind of challenge my viewers and challenge the world to say, why not? Why can't I create art that is valid and worthy? It just happens to have me in it as well. And then there's also, the sort of what do I get out of it aside from being able to process emotions and things. I get to be kind of vulnerable and practice that and practice expressing myself in a way that is kind of unique, both when you look at the finished work of art, but also, I do prefer to be alone when I shoot, to be in places that are less populated, but I can't always control that. And so it is really vulnerable to be wearing a dress in public and having my camera and being alone and having people stare at me, sometimes open-mouthed, and just kind of wonder, what on earth is she doing? Sometimes I wave, which is great fun. I also, get to play around. I get to be silly. I get to kind of do this thing that, I have been doing since I was a kid. So I think it does seem like a sort of childlike thing, but that's kind of how I am wanting to live my life, is to just have like childlike joy that I can continue, even though I'm no longer officially a child.
Well, that all sounds like perfectly reasonable and all valid reasons why you would want to do self-portraiture.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What do you want your work to say or accomplish?
I think one way that's coming to mind is, for the viewer, at least, I want anyone who views my work to feel something. So, I certainly feel things when I take photos. Maybe it's joy or awe or appreciation. Somebody just asked me this, actually. I just wrote down a list of things I feel when I take my photos yesterday. And I sometimes feel sadness if that's what I'm going through. I sometimes feel vulnerability. Like I said, I feel, a million different things, depending on a million different things. And maybe the viewer won't feel exactly what I felt when I was taking it. And that's okay. I think it's just important that they feel something. I think just like any work of art that's meant to evoke an emotion, I really want viewers to say, wow, that stops me in my tracks, or that is really, really cool. That makes me feel like I want to go there, or I want to just go on an adventure, or wow, what an interesting pose. That looks like something hard was going on. I want it to bring up something for them. Maybe it's like a memory or a sense of nostalgia or anything calm, really anything. It's kind of infinite, right? But yeah, I just want them to look at it and say, wow, this is a piece of art that really makes me think and feel. I also think it feels important to me to show both viewers of my work and myself that I can be authentic and that I can sort of do this thing that some people think is really cool and some people think is kind of weird and just like a side hobby level of value. And I can maybe, level it up a little bit, and I can do it and succeed, and I can be happy with it, and I can make other people happy or be my authentic self and have that be freeing in its own way.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on a little bit more of that theme of authenticity. It's definitely something that comes up on the show quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And I have some questions later on that'll kind of maybe drill a little bit further into what you mean by that. But I wanted to kind of get more into the technical side for a minute in terms of your techniques in the field. I'd be curious to hear you talk a little about what some of your secrets are for capturing interesting self-portraits in the landscape. And specifically, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about kind of your thought process around how to encapsulate the feeling that you're trying to evoke through the image through the use of different placements in the composition or the clothing you're wearing or your pose or where you're at in the landscape, things of that nature.
Okay. First, I will start with the actual technical components of shooting a self-portrait, which I think enough people shoot self-portraits these days that much of this stuff will not be too surprising. But for some people, I do find that it is surprising. So for everyone, I, of course, use a tripod when I shoot self-portraits. At least I plan to. I have been known to, on occasion, use other things in my vicinity if I'm without a tripod, like the floor, my camera bag, a chair, whatever it is. But generally, I want a tripod with me. That's where I put my camera. When it comes to actually taking the photos, I prefer to use an intervalometer. So my current camera has one built in, so I can set it to take, a photo every 2 seconds for 60 photos or, 90 photos or whatever it is, or unlimited until I feel satisfied. I know that, when I first started, I used a remote that I would you had 2 seconds to put it away before the picture took. So I would click the remote and then be like, oh my God, where do I put it? Sometimes I would drop it. I ruined many a remote in water or in snow or in whatever, because I just could not figure it out in time. And then there were also many photos when I first started where you could actually see the remote in my hand. And I was like, it's good enough. So the remote didn't have a very good range. So I don't use that anymore. There's also, I know, a phone app, but apparently it's not that good. So I've never actually tried that. As far as focusing and, framing the photo and all of that, if I have somebody with me, which I don't usually, but sometimes my husband can be dragged along forcefully, just kidding. Sometimes he comes with me and then I use him as sort of a stand-in for where I would want me to be, for the focus, for all of that. If not, I use a backpack or a tree or a rock or whatever's nearby. I always wear layers. Well, not always. Okay, if it's summer, I don't. But, so that was a lie. But in the winter, and I do a lot of my shooting in colder months. I said I was in Banff in January where we were on frozen lakes and it was very, very cold. I'm usually, wearing a dress and it looks like I'm very flowing and graceful, which I am. That part is real. But I'm also usually wearing multiple pairs of pants and socks and foot warmers and hiking boots. And then I always have a jacket and hand warmers ready for me to throw on between sets so that I don't freeze my face off. Yeah. So those are sort of my tools, I would say, for actually taking the photo. As far as sort of creative choices around clothing, framing, placement, all of that, I do choose my clothing somewhat strategically, though I use the word somewhat there intentionally because I don't always know exactly where I'm going to be. So, if I'm going to my local park, if I'm going to the beach, I know what it looks like and I can choose what I wear, just based on my mood. If I'm going somewhere new, which I like to do, so a new hike or a national park I've never been to or a new country, places that I've never seen before, I do like to bring a couple of options if I can, stuff them in my backpack and if I feel like carrying them. But I kind of find myself doing one of two things. One is I want to be complementary to the scenery. So, I'm going to be shooting during blue hour, so I'll wear a red dress and have that really pop. Or same with, I do that a lot in sort of a woodsy forest setting where it'll be surrounded by green and I'm wearing red because I think that's kind of a cool contrast. And I just, my whole life and my whole sort of aesthetic, personally is, okay, I'm wearing black, so I'm not really demonstrating this well, but I am a very vibrant person, kind of in personality and in what I like to look at and all of that. All the art that I have, that I own hanging on my walls is all really bright and sunsets and they're pink and vibrant. I'm looking at the photo behind you and saying, yes, that would fit in really nicely with my walls. So I really like that look of having a pop of color. So I will make that choice intentionally. The other thing I do really intentionally, which lately I've actually been finding myself doing more. And I don't know, I guess some part of me is really needing to blend in with nature. But I find myself sometimes choosing colors that are the same as my surroundings. So one of my favorite photos that I took this year, I was in a woodsy sort of state park that I visit frequently in Washington. And it was, in the spring. So everything was vibrant and green. And I have a green dress and I put it on and then I kind of posed sleeping on the tree, and it felt very peaceful to be there and very just like I belonged, which is funny because on the other side of the camera were my in-laws who were really wanting to see me take photos. So I had taken them out for this excursion. So it was a little bit chaotic, and I was able to find a small moment of peace. And it ended up being one of my favorites because I just really like how it is vibrant and also how I blended in. I think everything just kind of worked. So I ended up doing that quite a bit too. I did it with, there's a yellow dress I have that I took. You live in Colorado. Do you have larches where you are?
Aspens, which are
okay.
better.
Ouch.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, it's funny because my buddy Michael Bellino, who lives in Portland, he's like, bro, you got to come up and photograph the larches. And I'm like, but I've got the aspens, man. So we're always joking about it.
Well, larches are the best. Team larch. I'm with your friend who, yes, I agree.
They are pretty amazing. I agree.
They're really cool. They're really cool. And I actually, after 5 years of living in Seattle, I finally got to glimpse them with my own eyes this year. And I had this whole plan in my mind. So I did wear my yellow dress, and I was farther away from the camera than I usually am. And I just straight up like blend in to the larches. I actually was showing this photo to somebody recently, and he said, "Where are you?" in the photo. And it was on a phone screen. It was, very small and hard to see. But that, it does bring me both a sense of peace and kind of a sense of belonging almost to dress like that, to choose attire that matches my surroundings. And also, interestingly, I'm thinking of a more recent photo I took where I was in water and it was sunrise, and the photo is me in water, and then the water is reflecting the sunrise. You can't even see the sky or anything around it. And I ended up actually wearing like a bodysuit that was kind of light toned, like it almost could have blended in with my skin. And so that was kind of blending in a different way. And I remember feeling very vulnerable during the shoot because I'm wearing like essentially a bathing suit, and it's cold and it's 40 degrees and I'm like inside the water, cold. And I don't know, it just feels kind of freeing to do things like that, to do things where I'm kind of just one with nature. I kind of joke sometimes that I want to be one with nature, and it's not actually a joke. I think, nature is just so beautiful that why wouldn't I want to be a part of it? Okay, so you're talking about composition. So I am not a trained landscape photographer. I respect landscape photographers, and I mean, like I said, I think landscape photography is beautiful, but I don't consider myself to be someone who takes photos with the eye of a landscape photographer. I think I have sort of this blend of landscape and portrait and something unique that maybe I've made up. I'm not really sure. So when I'm composing a photo, I do want the photo to look good, overall, full stop. But I am thinking about where am I going to be. So I might frame a photo with a rock, let's say like a boulder or something, or a tree, where you might not necessarily think to put that tree, because I know that I'm going to go lean on it or sit on it, or I'm going to interact with it in some way, and I'm going to add a piece that's not there in the landscape. So I am thinking about where am I? I'm thinking about what might kind of take the viewer by surprise almost. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about how do I be unique here? How do I not just, take another photo of a really pretty tree that's been shot like 100 times? How do I do it in a way that does add sort of a special element? I wish there was some more insight I could add there. But it is, it's a lot of intuition. It's a lot of just, yes, I took the classes. Yes, I understand, the rules about composing photographs. And I would not say that I follow those rules all the time.
That's good.
And I know that you're not supposed to, so that's fantastic. I guess I'm doing it right. But yeah, I would say that it really is just, what am I feeling? Like, what do I think is going to be an intriguing photo? And there's a lot of trial and error, at least for me. I'm a little bit impulsive. Well, I am impulsive. But in this case, I would say I'm, intuitive to the point of like, wow, I thought that was going to look really good. And like, sometimes it's fantastic. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I need to actually like readjust the whole thing. So yeah, there's a lot of what am I feeling and what does it actually look like on the back of my camera? And that's, one of the hard things about being a self-portrait photographer is that you never know what it's going to look like until after you've already spent the time setting up and getting dressed and going out and posing. And then you come back and you're like, oh my God, it's terrible. That's just part of the fun, honestly. It's just the experimentation. And I get to be out there longer doing what I love. So that's fantastic. As far as posing, there's a lot you can do with posing in self-portraiture. There's also a little you can do. Like, you can kind of be as simple or as complex as you want. So I really love if I or another self-portrait photographer like uses hands or uses, hair, or uses the dress, or uses like any sort of like small ways to express yourself. So I do often find myself using my fingers a lot, my hands, and I'm like doing it right now, like what's happening. Somebody once actually, I sent a Snapchat of like one of my photos to a friend, and he responded with, "What do you do with your hands? You take self-portraits?" And I was like, "What a good question." I never actually thought about it. So since then, I have tried to pay more attention to what I do with my hands. Sometimes they're more like open. If I'm trying to express an openness or a joy or something like that, I might more have like palms up. If I'm trying to express like a sadness or a frustration or something, it might be like a more closed pose, more like hands down. This is also like not a hard and fast rule. I've taken many like palm down photo that I think is meant to be more open. So it really depends. I love interacting with my surroundings. So again, if there's a tree, if there's wind, I love wind in photos. I know a lot of people, see wind and they're like, "Oh, I'm staying inside." And I'm like, "Let's go, get the camera, we're leaving." So yes, I love any sort of like weather, like wind or fog. Rain is annoying, but also does cool things for photos. So yeah, any sort of like interesting, basically anything but a sunny day, I'm all about. Yeah, and I really just like to interact with what's around me. And I mean, I don't plan my poses or anything. It's very in the moment, just kind of what am I feeling. And when I go out and I'm in front of the camera, what do I see? What are my surroundings? What do they bring up for me? And I just kind of pose accordingly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to take a quick pause from the episode to let you know that it's that time of year again. The Natural Landscape Photography Awards are right around the corner. Mark your calendars because entries open on April 15th and close on May 31st. This competition was created by me and a few fellow photographers to celebrate landscape photography in its purest form. Whether you're a digital photographer or a lover of film, this is your chance to showcase your skill, creativity, and fieldcraft while staying true to the natural beauty of the landscapes that we all cherish. With over $25,000 in prizes, including $16,500 in cash, international exposure, and the chance to have your work published in a stunning fine art photography book, this competition is the real deal. And here's the best part. If you make it to the finals, you'll receive a copy of the book for free. We're looking for photographs that tell a story, connect us to the natural world, and reflect the incredible moments that you've captured without relying on heavy editing or AI-generated techniques. So, if you're ready to elevate your photography and join a community of like-minded artists, visit naturallandscapeawards.com for all the details. Again, that's naturallandscapeawards.com. Let's make this year's competition one to remember. Okay, let's get back to the show. This might seem like a fairly obvious question, but I promise, well, we'll see. With self-portraits in the landscape, do you see yourself as the main subject, or are you a complementary subject to the landscape, or vice versa? Or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It feels like a cop-out almost to say a little bit of both, but the answer is truly neither. I don't see myself as the main subject, but I also don't see the landscape as the main subject. I kind of, as cheesy and like hippie-ish as this sounds, but I live in Seattle, so you got to give this to me. I do actually view myself as part of the landscape. Like whether I'm matching in color or opposing or whatever it is, I do kind of see myself as just fitting in and just existing within sort of everything. So I think you can't have one without the other. For me, my work would not feel the same if I took it without me, and it wouldn't feel the same if I did the same pose in the same outfit in front of a white wall. I feel like you do need them both.
It's a little bit of a trick question because I was in a little bit of an argument with two of our co-founders of the competition I created, Natural Landscape Photography Awards, and we were talking about photos that have human element or man-made objects in the photo, and we're trying to kind of come to some agreement of like what should be allowed, what shouldn't be allowed, and like we kept coming back to this idea of like what's the main subject of the photograph, and I kept pushing back saying, in an ideal world, it's neither. It's like it's the interaction of the two subjects and the idea that they're trying to express together is the main subject of the photo. So like if you're, I'm just going to use an example, like if you're in a dress and you're in a awesome forest and you're wearing it and you're posed in a certain way that's conveying an idea or expressing a thought or an emotion, like that expression of an idea or emotion is the subject, not you,
Yeah.
not the forest, not the
Yeah.
tree, right?
Yeah.
Which I think for some people that's like, wait, what? But
No, I love that. I wish you could like shout that from the rooftops. I want everyone to hear that because yes, I agree.
it's a hard thing to do, right? Like I know lots of people try and fail to convey that type of a subject through a photograph. So it's not easy, right?
It's not easy. And I will say, I mean, I told you a while ago that I spent this year taking 120 photos that I shared them all. I mean, I shared them all on Instagram for accountability, not because it was just a project for myself. And I'm sure you know this as a photographer too, that you might take 200 photos and like maybe 10 of them are portfolio worthy, you know? And so it is hard to convey that. And with everyone, I get more practice. And there's also just some days it's my day and some days it's not. And that doesn't mean it's not a good photo. It just means, it may not have the impact that a different one had. But it's rare. I mean, this year at least, I took a pretty high volume of photos. And some of them do have that effect, I think. And many of them are just pretty pictures that, gave me the practice, gave me the expression, the outlet, all of that. And that doesn't mean, again, they're not worthy of being shared. But yes, that's just to emphasize that I totally agree. It is very, very hard to achieve that.
And not to make it more complicated, but another layer on top of this is the fact that you could take a photograph that you're trying. You're like, oh, I wish it was expressing this, but I don't think it works the way I was intending it to work. And then you share it, you show it online, and 10 different people are going to have 10 different reactions. And one of them might be like, wow, it really strongly conveys this emotion, this idea. And as the creator, you're like, I didn't see that, but that's really cool that you see that, right? So, it's really hard to remember that can happen. And I don't think it makes sense to like think about it too much, but I think it makes sense in terms of like not being too critical of our work in some ways, because sometimes maybe it's a good idea that you were instinctively drawn to and you executed it well, and maybe you didn't feel like it checked the boxes of what you thought it was supposed to be, but an audience is out there that might think otherwise, and I think that's an interesting dynamic.
It is really interesting. And again, not that sharing a photo on social media is the end all be all of photography. In fact, it is definitely not. But I am sometimes surprised by people's reactions to photos that I just kind of thought, well, I committed to this project, so I'm going to share number 13 out of 30. It's not my favorite, but here it is. And people are like blown away by it. And I think, what am I missing? What is it about this photo that's hitting other people? Do I have like eyes that are not working right? I don't totally know. I notice it also specifically. Occasionally I like to, like interact with people on social media or else it's just like a hole where everything goes to die. So sometimes if I am posting one of those photos where I kind of was like, yeah, I like it. It's fine. I'm proud of it. I'm going to share it. If I have an alternate version, like either I swapped out my dress or I did a different pose or something else changed about it, I will post on my stories, the two photos next to each other and kind of put a poll, like which one do you like better? 80% of the time, that's an estimate. But a lot of the time, people like the one that I didn't post. And I'm always like, I guess my eye is a lot different than other people's. And it is. I mean, it is one of those things where, especially with self-portraiture, because I'm in it, it's hard for me, I think, to separate my experience of the photo from the experience of viewing the photo. So I might see a picture and remember that I was like really, really cold during that one, or that I was kind of frustrated because the light was changing rapidly or something like that. And someone else sees it and they don't have any of that. So they say, oh, I love this. I just like it better. And it's, interesting exercise in letting go of my own expectations and just realizing that, it is for me, but it also is for everyone, for anyone who wants to see it.
Yeah, that just now hit me in terms of like, I think as photographers, we all have like a connection to our work that might not be real in terms of like, I really love this photo because of the memory that went into it or the effort that I had to go in order to capture it, whatever. But in your case with self-portraiture, there's an added element of like, I don't like the way I look in that photo, or man, that dress makes me look XYZ, or man, I wish I was looking this direction and not that direction because because I'm looking this way, it makes my chin look bigger or whatever, something,
Hey,
you know what I mean?
now,
Like,
that is one of the things that my dietitian self takes issue with. So I hear you. And
but no, I'm just saying like that's a whole other
yeah,
element that I just now
absolutely.
it just
Yes.
hit me.
And to be clear, I'm not immune to body image issues just because I do it for part of my job. I mean, I certainly look at photos and think, I didn't think I looked like that in the mirror, but apparently I do.
Right. Well, especially, self-portraiture, you're probably at different angles that you're not used to seeing yourself. And so, yeah, no, that's really interesting. So maybe this is a good segue for us to talk a little bit about kind of the ups and downs that you've had in your self-portrait photography journey. And my understanding is that some of those ups and downs in your photography journey have kind of coincided with ups and downs in your personal life. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how those two are interconnected for you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good and a really insightful question because it's not something that, I share, not like I'm not sharing openly. I am sharing things that are real and authentic, but there are certain things, that I'm not sharing. Like, this is the exact issue I was having with my body at this exact moment, and here's how it impacted me. Or like, here's a really terrible thing that happened in my life, right? I think some of that, we need to share because as humans, it's important to express emotion and let other people know it's okay to be an emotional human and to go through hardship. But there are certainly just things that we all, I think, want to share with our journals or our close friends or our spouses or whatever it is. And so there are some things that I kind of do leave up to the interpretation of the viewer. I'm not always very clear. This is the hard thing that I was processing while I was taking this photo. And I mean, part of that is intentional, that I do want the viewer to again, like, see my work and decide for themselves what it means to them, because that's not up to me to decide what my work means to someone else. But I will say that it's kind of counterintuitive a little bit that photography, especially self-portraiture, has always been this emotional outlet for me, this place where I can go and, I mean, a physical place, but also a place in my mind, like a mindset that I can access where I'm kind of, I get into a flow state, which as somebody with ADHD is very, very hard for me to access a lot of the time. And photography is one of the more consistent ways that I've found where I kind of am separate from time a little bit. I mean, both because I'm like taking off my watch and I'm putting my phone away, so I don't know what time it is, but also I don't feel the need to know. I'm so connected with what I'm doing. And so it is in that way just a really important way to move through things. And so it's gotten me through just things really sucking sometimes, as life sometimes does, I remember in high school doing that for the first time. I was doing my 365 project and I was having a really hard day. I don't even know why. I think it was because I was a teenager and everything just felt really hard and impossible, even though it wasn't. Things were probably fine, but in my mind, they were not fine. And I went out to one of my usual sort of woodsier spots. And this is also, it's kind of funny to look back at these photos because I didn't dress in any particular way when I first started. So there were photos of me wearing like t-shirts with like words on them and things that I just wouldn't wear now because I think they take away from the art a little bit. But in this photo, I think I was wearing like a waffle shirt that had stars on it or something. So not really in keeping with the emotion I was feeling. But I went into the woods and I took this photo where like my fists were balled up and I was moving really fast. And so my hair was like, just like flung like, across the frame. And I think I was like, had my head down. And I just remember, I can actually recall that feeling now, being so angry and just wanting to like punch the air, which is essentially what I did in this photo. And gosh, now I'm going to have to share the photo with you and you're going to look at it and be like, what is this? I will say, disclaimer for anyone watching this, my editing style has changed, thankfully. And so I, remember in those days doing it really, really intentionally. Like, I'm going through something hard. I'm going to get my camera and go. Like, I need to go get this out of my system. I have some other tools for doing that now. So I occasionally do that, but I would also might like go for a walk or I might call a friend. I would say that my number of tools for that has diversified. But in that way, self-portraiture has gotten me through some really hard times where, the photo that I take might not mean anything to anyone else. Especially like a photo with my fist balled and my hair in everyone's face. Like, that's not a photo that you want to hang on your wall. But for me, that was really personal and really valuable. And I really got to do something that if I were to like go to the grocery store and start like banging my head around, people would be like, what is she doing? But I'm in the woods alone and I can do it and it's safe. and it's a good space for me to let that out. Yeah, that's kind of a way that I've used it really intentionally to work through emotions. Interestingly, as I've gotten older, so, a little bit in college, after college, I was really focused on, being a 20-something-year-old and living my life and like not wanting to, I don't know, do anything wrong, sort of. So like in college, I was really into my social life. And I'm just like, being a college student. So I kind of wasn't as active with my photography. After college, I had a job and I was really into having a job and it was really time consuming. So I also wasn't very active then. And looking back on those times, those are some times when I probably really could have used an outlet like self-portraiture, that I was not really making use of this skill that I had, or at least not consistently. I mean, I did do a little bit, but it was nowhere near as consistent as I've been recently. It is interesting to zoom out from my life a little bit and see, here are the holes in when I was less active with my self-portraiture, and here's what that maybe could have given me had I been doing it, So I don't know. I think lately, the past year or 2 years, I've been much more consistent with it, and I do think that it's made a difference. I think I've been able to create more and do this thing that brings me so much joy, and I've been able to we're getting really deep now, but I've been able to find sort of a sense of self-acceptance that I've been on a journey to find for a long time, and it's been, slowly coming. But I think taking the step to be more active with my photography has been sort of the thing that was kind of missing, I think, before, because it's so authentic to me. It is just like the thing that my soul wants to do. You can see me like laughing at myself for saying those words even. And maybe it's not something you hear a lot as a landscape photographer. You're not hearing people say like, yeah, it's really like what my soul wants to do.
Oh no.
But it's kind of true. Oh, you are?
I hope you are. We hear that stuff all the time.
Okay. Amazing. I love it. Yeah, but I think it's just it's like necessary for me. It's like a thing that, I'm kind of on a mission to make this a more central part of my career and to do something more with it and to serve more people in different ways with it. But even if I never do any of that, it's still something that I need. There's kind of no way around it, that it's a thing that my body needs to do.
I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about how your mental state or your emotional state impacts your desire and or ability to execute on some of your self-portrait work. Because I found that in landscape photography, there's a lot of photographers who create some of their best and most prolific work when they're going through more challenging times. And it sounds like you've used self-portraiture as kind of a tool to get through some of that. But I'd be curious to hear you talk about, like, when things are going really good, is it still easy to connect that way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It depends. And I would say that sometimes going through a very hard or a very positive situation in life, it can span days or weeks or months. It's not like something bad happens one day and you're like, well, I went out to take photos and now I feel so much better. Sometimes, if it's like this one thing was like really weighing on me, but for a lot of things, it's like life is hard and things are really heavy and, people die and just things get really messy. And so that does take a while to move through. And if I'm moving through something big, good or bad, it could take a while. And every time I take self-portraits during that period of moving through, it's different. It's not like I take 10 self-portraits and each one is like, well, I healed like this piece of it and now this piece of it. It's very organic, as human emotions are. And so in that way, it's a little bit unpredictable, sort of how the emotion I'm feeling is going to impact my shoot. As far as going through something, times are good. If I'm like on top of the world, like I don't know, I got married last year and that was amazing. We love being married. But, that was a time in my life where I was like, wow, life is fantastic. People are sending us gifts and they're calling us newlyweds. And I still was taking a lot of self-portraits during that time. I actually, a couple months after we got married is when we were in Canada. And that was a trip that was not exclusively for photography, but it was you can ask my then 2-month husband what he thought of the 4 a.m. wake up calls to drive across Banff to take the photos. But I have been able to kind of channel my, it changes, right? It could be my love of the art. It could be my excitement for where I am, especially if I'm in a new place like that, that's so beautiful. It could be this year, I actually, for most of the year, and kind of still, I felt this really deep determination to, make it, if you will, with my art, with my photography. I just felt this drive really that's, I felt it before, but this is like on another level. Like, I don't know, but that in its own way drives me. It's, it's not a negative emotion and it's not a positive emotion. It's just sort of this desire, this like burning sort of thing that won't go away. And every time I create a self-portrait, it's there with me and it is giving me that sort of motivation that I maybe am not always getting from a hard time or from a difficult thing I'm working through. And, sometimes that is kind of what I want to convey in my photos. I don't always want to be conveying the negative emotions. So sometimes when I'm kind of riding those highs, I'm like, great, I'm going to just be joyful and I'm going to see how I can express that joy in this photo. And can it still be as good as one where I'm like really having a hard time? And I've kind of found that the answer is yes, that it's fun. I mean, it's maybe more fun. It's not maybe as soul nourishing. It's not as like, oh, I really needed that. It's not as therapeutic in that way, but it is just a lot of fun to create when I'm just really loving it.
I love that you said that because I think especially in landscape photography, there's kind of this negative stigma in the arts world around, well, all you're doing is out there, you're just taking pictures of beauty, right? And it's like, what's wrong with beauty, right? Like beauty is pretty awesome. Like it has all these positive benefits on your emotional state. Like there's been scientific studies that have proven like if you spend time looking at a beautiful photograph, your blood pressure goes down. Like it actually is a very beneficial part of the human experience to appreciate beauty and capture beauty and experience beauty. So like, I just love that you said that, sometimes if I'm trying to convey joy and happiness, like that can be equally beneficial as expressing other emotions that maybe are more associated with art. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. We are on the same wavelength here because I definitely think there's absolutely nothing wrong and many things right with just appreciating beauty for beauty's sake. And it's something that I think enough people don't do enough. One of the reasons why I, never want to move out of the state of Washington. Who knows what's going to happen? But because I'm newly married, people ask my husband and I that all the time because neither of us are from here. We're from the East Coast or near the East Coast. People are always like, are you moving back? And I'm like, show me a mountain in Maryland and I will move there.
Yeah. There's a reason why people move to the West Coast.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how your work as a dietitian intersects with your photography and the journey that you're kind of embarking on now.
Yeah. So as I explained in the beginning, I'm an anti-diet dietitian. So, that has sort of a range of meanings. I do a range of things in my work. I counsel people one-on-one on, again, body image, disordered eating, relationship with food, eating disorders, all of those things that are kind of intertwined. They're very intertwined. And I see over time people saying, I used to hate my body. My body has not changed. It is the same size. And now I'm able to accept it, if not love it. And that's a really beautiful thing to see. Something that often comes up along the way, a lot. Over half my clients, maybe all my clients, at some point or another, maybe in one session, maybe we spent 5 sessions talking about it. They say something like, I was having a really great day. I was feeling cute. I had on a nice outfit. I was like really feeling myself. And then I went out and I posed for photos with some friends and I saw the photos and then my day like totally took a turn and I hate everything, right? Like I didn't like the way I looked in photos. And that's a huge trigger for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So, and that's something that, I'm not immune to that. Again, like this is my job, but I'm a human and I have feelings and I have a body, right? And I hear society's messaging just as much as anyone else does. And so I also have struggled with that kind of thing. And I've also seen photos of myself and said, ooh, that's what I look like. And it's not always in my self-portraits. I mean, you can talk about like being in college and going out socially and like seeing a photo and thinking, oh, I thought I looked so cute. And it turns out I don't, which is silly. And no one deserves to think like that. And that is, I think, for me, it was kind of inadvertent. That's one of the ways that self-portraiture has helped me heal my own body image. Albeit it's a very unique way and it's not something that's really advertised as like a body image healing device, but it is something that, that I've experienced and that I would like other people to experience. I think, you don't have to be a professional photographer. You don't have to own, a DSLR or any of the fancy stuff to do it. You can have an iPhone and a friend who can be your human tripod, right? It does not have to be to the level that, that I or the other people take it to. But it's something that, because of my own experience as a photographer, as a human, as a dietitian, it's starting to feel more and more important to me that I blend sort of my two expertises, I guess, that I help people who are, I do work with people one-on-one who some of them are artists, they're creatives, they really like self-expression in that way. And I've even had discussions with certain clients about this, about whatever their form of art is. Like, can you paint a self-portrait of your body? Can you paint the part of your body that gives you the most sort of pause when you look at it? Can you turn your body into art? And that's exactly what I do. And so I just think there's so much value in this. And it's self-portrait photography is such a unique art form that it's not something that occurs to a lot of people as a tool they can use.
It's not obvious.
No, it is definitely not obvious. And I mean, because I tell people I do it and they're like, "You what? What do you mean? You're a what? Are you just like taking, people think I'm taking selfies, like selfies."
Right.
I'm definitely not taking selfies. And I think the act of creating a self-portrait, it's not just about the body. It's not just about how do I look. It's about learning the technique, learning how to compose a photo, learning how to meter your camera if that's something you're new to. It's about the technical stuff as much as it is about the creative part and the beauty part. And I think for me, at least, getting into that state of total focus and just wanting my photo to turn out the way I want, or turn out anyway, right? Just wanting to take something beautiful, that's healing too. Kind of like what you were saying about being in nature, because I mean, not all self-portrait photographers take photos in nature. But
Sure.
That there's a lot of science around the idea that spending time in nature is so good for your mental health, and your body image is related to that mental health. And so it's kind of, you get two benefits, right? You get the benefit of being in nature and being able to breathe deeply and have it not smell like exhaust and, see really cool things around you. And you also get the benefit of kind of doing an exposure, like exposing yourself to this thing that maybe you fear or is so uncomfortable for you. And I think there's maybe some benefit in pairing those two things and showing yourself, I can make art that is beautiful, even if I don't always think I'm beautiful.
And there's a third thing, right? I mean, I know you mentioned like people being okay with their body image, and I'm all for that. And when you're out in nature as a photographer, usually it requires you to do a little bit of physical effort and a little exercise,
Yes.
which no matter what your body size is, there's immeasurable science supporting the fact that exercise is one of the best things you can do for yourself long-term for health reasons. So, like, you have three benefits.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. That's so true. And, as long as it's accessible to you, I know certain terrains are not accessible to all people, but, you don't have to do a ridiculously high grade hike to get to really beautiful places. There are places where you just walk a mile, or you just walk 10 steps, if that's what's accessible, right? Any amount of movement is so good for your mental and physical health. So yes, you got that right. I don't know why I did that.
You're good. So let's talk a little bit about the workshops that you're planning on hosting. I think you'd mentioned to me that you're working on a workshop concept where you're able to use self-portrait photography and your knowledge as a dietitian to help others. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what that's going to look like.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for asking about this. I'm really excited to talk about this. So it is one of my longer term goals as a photographer, and in this case as a dietitian, to lead workshops and retreats. I mean, I have like really ideal dream of a goal would be to do this, like a week-long retreat in another country, somewhere beautiful where we can all just kind of gather and take photos and be creative and eat good food and kind of heal, and build community and all of that. But of course, with anything, I'm going to start small. So right now, I am working on planning a workshop that would, entail some things I've talked about just a couple minutes ago. I was talking about, doing that exposure of taking photos while learning the technical piece and being in nature. I'm actually going to be partnering with a fellow dietitian friend of mine who is also, a body image specialist. She's very talented, and we both had the skills to do the counseling dietitian stuff. She has a bit more experience with that than me, and I have basically all of the experience in photography. So we're going to be putting together probably just a day long, or possibly a couple days, depending on logistics. It'll be a workshop where we get together, and it'll be a small group, and we'll start with sort of a expectations setting, sort of talking about why people are here and what are you nervous about? What are you fearing? What do you want to get out of this? And then I will, do the education on here's how you compose a photo. Here's what I do when I take self-portraits. Here's, sort of some of the choices that I make and why. And then, we will have everyone take their own self-portraits. And again, like with whatever camera, they could have a DSLR, they could have a mirrorless, they could have an iPhone, anything's fair game. We just want them to be, getting into that creative space and getting into the space of creating art with their body rather than seeing their body as the enemy, while also challenging the beliefs in their head and in society that say, like, you're not thin enough, you're not pretty enough to be in photos. Like, that's ridiculous and not true. So we want to help them challenge that with guidance, right? I will be providing guidance as far as, technical support and what if the photo's not turning out, like what if something's being done wrong? And then we will also be there providing emotional guidance and support. What if you just really are feeling weird? What if you're feeling uncomfortable? How do you move through that and continue to have an experience that will provide you some value? And then afterwards, we'll do, a little debrief on what came up, what was hard for you, what did you kind of gain from this, how, was there any healing done? And that's sort of a rough description of what the workshops will be. We are still in the beginning planning stages, though I think by the time this airs, they will be happening soon. I think we're doing them and we're planning on March, I think, as of right now. So,
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of the idea. And I think one of my goals at least would be to do this sort of 1 to 2 day smaller workshop, both because it's more local. We'll be doing it local to Seattle so that nobody has to like drive forever or stay overnight somewhere. So it's more accessible, with potentially the longer term goal of doing a longer week long, retreat where we can, get more in depth and go more into it. Because this isn't, photography is a very helpful tool for healing body image, but doing it in a day is just one day out of a lifetime, right? It's not like we're going in thinking, okay, we're going to like heal everyone. They're never going to need support. They're never going to need therapy ever again. That is unrealistic. So the goal, of course, would be how do we make this even a more impactful experience? But I'm very, very, very excited for our first go at this type of workshop.
And I'm guessing if someone's interested in that, the best way to stay up to date is to go to your website, get on your newsletter so that when those start to roll out, they'll get an email about it.
Yes, definitely. So yes, my website newsletter, which you can find easily on the website, how easily it will pop up for you. Sorry if that's very annoying. And then I'll probably be sharing a little bit of it on Instagram as well, but definitely my newsletter would be the number one most detailed spot to find that.
Cool. Yeah, and that'll be on the show notes, so all good.
Cool. Great.
All right. So taking a slightly more controversial turn here, just for fun.
I love it.
It's something I sort of enjoy to do sometimes, to poke the hornet's nest a little bit. So obviously, I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm painting with a fairly large brush here, right? In my circles and people I've talked to in photography, I've found that for a lot of people, self-portrait photography is often associated with women in bikinis looking to grow their social media numbers, a lot of thirst traps, people who are like trying to become influencers, or they are influencers and they've got, 200, 300,000 followers and they're promoting other people's products. How do you navigate this particular space as someone with a completely different goal?
Yes, I do have a completely different goal. Thank you for highlighting that. Yeah, it's hard because I do feel this really strong sense of pride for being kind of, the internet's a big place, right? It was slightly less big around 2009 or so when I was starting. Again, there was no Instagram, there was no 200,000 followers, there was none of that. And so I do take a lot of pride in sort of being one of the first that I know of, like, modern day self-portrait photographers. I know women have been really rocking it in, nature, landscape photos for a long time. Women have been doing amazing work in the landscape and art area for a really long time. So I know I'm not the first, but I have been around for much longer than a lot of the, Instagram influencer, bikini selling, sort of like that vibe of artist or influencer. Don't know, I guess, what the proper word is there. Maybe
I'm not gonna make you take a stance there, but I'm
Thank you.
Pretty sure we're on the same page.
Great. And I've never wanted to present myself or my art that way. That would not be in line with my values as a human, with my authentic self as an artist, a photographer, and a model of my, of my own work, I guess. That's weird. I hardly ever call myself a model. In fact, I never do. But maybe part of the subject. And it is hard now, knowing that I have, over a decade and a half of experience in this field. I've been doing it for longer than almost anyone on social media at this point, I think. And there are people coming in saying, like, look at my body, look at these things I'm selling, look at me. And they are getting a lot of attention for that. And I'm not in it for the attention. I mean, if I want to support myself as an artist, I need to get some attention in order to have an audience who wants to engage with my work, come to my workshops, things like that. And I think that's valuable, and I think people should do that. But it would feel icky to me to do it sort of the influencer route and just be in it for the likes and all of that. I want to take self-portraits whether I'm on social media or not. I will continue to do so even if Instagram dies. And if we have no way of sharing photos for likes, like, I will continue to be the same kind of photographer that I am. And it's hard because people, I think, put me in that bucket without really knowing. That's, in addition to the, like, what is self-portrait photography? Wow, can I see your photos? So are you just taking selfies? Like, all of that feedback. Something else I get is, so you're just an influencer, right? People kind of make assumptions that I'm just in it for the products or for the notoriety on Instagram or whatever it is. And I'm definitely not. And it's hard, but see, I'm also, wearing dresses now in my, the last few years of photos. I am wearing things that would imply maybe something that is not true about my work. And nobody knows. I can tell the truth about my own work, but nobody can, like, see inside my brain and say, oh yeah, that's right, she's telling the truth, right? Like, all I can do is continue creating my art and putting it out in the way that feels best to me, and hoping that the people who do view my work are ones that trust me, that are here for reasons that we can kind of mutually respect each other. And before we started recording today, I made a joke about you buying one of my prints, and you said, well, I don't know if my wife would like a photo of another woman hanging on the wall. And the thing that came up for me immediately was sort of, my, like, I don't know if defense is the right word. I don't want to feel like I have to defend my work all the time. But what came up for me was, a lot of people have art in their homes, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or, whatever it is. People have art that depicts human bodies, right? Whether it's, a close-up of maybe a face, or if it's, I can think of somebody I know has a really beautiful painting, like, front and center over their fireplace at home, that depicts a woman and a couple of children, and they're on the beach, and there's, like, kind of a breeze, and the woman's skirt is kind of blowing, and it's a very, like, intimate and really beautiful work of art. And I kind of want to point to that and say, why is my art not viewed the same way as just art, as just a thing of beauty that can be admired, it can be hung on a wall, it can be talked about, it can evoke emotion, all of that? Why do people, a lot of people, not everyone, but why do people automatically jump to the conclusion of, oh, well, it's 2024 and you're on Instagram, you must just be doing it for the likes, And it's, it is hard because I do use Instagram as a tool. So there is this line, a line that I have to draw sort of for myself morally and in my actions, but also that the other people, I hope, would kind of see in the way that I share my work, in the way that I show up on social media, and say, okay, maybe she is different. Maybe she is an artist who is trying to create something of value and not just, do it for the attention. I feel like there's kind of another piece in here, though, that's hard, which is that, again, like, if I want to support myself as an artist, I can sell prints. I do sell prints. If anyone wants to buy my prints, they're on sale. But that, for me, at least so far, is not a sustainable way to make a living, a full living. So I need to do other things. Yes, I absolutely am super thrilled, so excited, like, really over the moon about these workshops and retreats that I'm planning. But there's other things too. There is, like, do I collaborate with brands and try to promote products? That being said, I would only ever do that for products that I believe in, that I use, things that I think help me with my art, that, provide some value in my life. But that is still selling something, which is hard, and I'm not sure if
it is hard.
Yeah. And I don't know if I would do that. I mean, then again, I don't know. It's so hard. So I just really try to live my life from a place of living in accordance with my values. And so I guess if that opportunity ever showed up, I would evaluate, what does this thing, this potential like product, partnership, whatever, what does it do for me? And do I believe in the product? Like if Shimoda wants to sponsor me, thank you. I would definitely do that. But, if it's like someone I've never heard of, I guess I'd have to like be a little bit discerning. Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, there is a line. It's 2024, right? So like, it's hard. It's really hard because of the way that the internet works and the way that capitalism works. And
these are things that I think about for myself as well, especially in regards to the podcast, because it's like, I understand that there's kind of a fine line that we walk when we are creating something of value, whether that be content or artwork or whatever it is. And I love what you said about values, because that is kind of like the checkbox, right? Like, does this align with my values or not? And then the tougher question is then like, how do I, or maybe you don't care, but it's like, how do I convey that to my audience, like without them judging me? Like, I remember, I don't even remember what caused this to happen, but I had a listener one time a couple of years ago was like, this podcast is sold out to social media and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I have no idea what this guy's talking about. I have, the podcast has like 3,000 Instagram followers. I mean, I don't understand what you're saying here, but anyways, like there's that kind of knee-jerk reaction that happens in this space. And I'm as guilty as anyone. Like I see that kind of stuff all the time and I'm like, ugh, so it's hard, right?
Yeah,
like
it's so hard. Well, I was actually going to ask you, especially knowing that email exchange you had, how do you partner with brands? Like, how do you decide what is aligned for you? And like, how do you, if you are trying to avoid being like too salesy, which I don't know if you are, I guess.
Man, well, to my own detriment, I definitely am very cautious about that. So what you said earlier is very true for me around like, I would never promote something that I didn't personally think was useful or, like if it's something that I would use and it's cool and I want to recommend it to someone else, not just because it's the highest bidder. Like, for example, I could probably easily get several big name photography print labs to advertise, right? But like, I don't trust their product. And so like for them to be like, we'll pay you $1,000 a month to promote our product, and me knowing that I don't like that product, that would be a conflict, internal conflict for me, like that I can't cross that line, right? So and I think for better or worse, there's a lot of people out there that don't have that line, like they don't care. And I don't. In some ways, that sounds kind of nice and freeing, but at the other end of the spectrum, it's like, how do you sleep at night? So I don't. And I'm not trying to be judgmental around that particular value judgment or decision making process that people make, but at the end of the day, it's personal, right? Like, if you're comfortable promoting something that you don't think is very good, but it gets you a lot of money, like that's the bed you get to lie in, and and that's the image that you get to project. And so I don't know, like it's reputation based for me. Like I'm only going to promote stuff that I know is something I use and I value.
Well, that's good to know as somebody who, again, like I have the disconnect of like having so much experience with this type of photography, but not for other reasons that we could talk about for a whole other hour, but I've not ever until recently tried to actually get serious about this as a job, basically as a career. And it is, so I feel like I am from that perspective, starting from the beginning of like trying to figure my way out, how do I make this sustainable? And to know that you're having trouble and you've been doing this professionally for a lot longer than me and have a much larger audience, that is good to know and also really sad.
I mean, man, we could have a whole 2-hour podcast about this because to be fair, like almost every photographer I talk to struggles with this kind of stuff. At least people who are like doing it full time professionally. And the best advice I can give to people is, you need to diversify. And you need to have a marketing plan, and you need to have a strategy, and you need to spend probably a lot more time marketing yourself than you probably are comfortable doing. So, start there. Because honestly, like the people who are the most well-known in this space, the people who we perceive to be the most famous, like with the largest followings, it's usually not because they have the best photography or the best workshops or the best product. They are just really, really, really good at marketing.
Yeah, not to be put on the show, but I did notice that you had Mads Peter Iverson on recently, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to follow that guy. He's like, in my mind, like famous. Like that's so intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, again, like he's done a really great job of marketing himself. He takes great photographs, but also, I mean, the guy's put countless hours into his YouTube channel, and
Yeah.
so I mean, that's the other thing too is like people, you have to grind, all right? Like you could be the best self-portrait photographer on planet Earth, and maybe you are, right? But like, unless like until people don't know who you are, it doesn't matter, right? So
I know, which is hard because I mean, there are certainly self-portrait photographers who are more well known than me, and I respect them greatly, and they're really talented. And that doesn't mean I don't think that makes me any worse of a photographer. I think I'm just as good. I just, yeah, I haven't been trying to put myself out there as much until recently. So yeah, it is hard.
it is hard. It is hard. All right. That was a little side deviation there, but get us a little back on track here. So, knowing that a lot of judgment comes with putting yourself in the photograph, especially as a woman, how have you been able to get over the unfortunate fact that people do that when they're looking at your style of work?
Yeah, yeah. I will say maybe because of my very small following. So, hey, this is a benefit that I don't get a lot of negative comments or negative feedback on my work, at least not that kind where people are, you know, judging me or objectifying me or anything like that. So, there's, I guess, positive and negative to still being relatively, unknown, that I have the freedom to express myself however I want and not, get backlash for it. I do, however, experience that a lot in person. So when I'm actually shooting, there is a park really close to my house. It's, I think, the closest one to me. So it's where I end up going a lot of the time if I'm kind of in a time crunch or if I'm just, again, wanting to like create something. If I'm just wanting to express something, I often go to this park. And for some reason, I've noticed, the different local parks around me kind of all have their different, like the people there have like collective personalities or like collective reactions to my work. So like there's a different place I go where I never get spoken to at all. People ignore me. They apologize for having their dogs come too close to me and then they move on, right? Like they're very like on their own, solitary. This particular place that I go, so close to my apartment, people always comment. I get some really ridiculous comments. Some of them are nice. Some of them are supportive. Like, wow, that's going to make a really beautiful photo. I got that one once and that made me smile. But sometimes people just stare at me. I mean, they're just looking at me and they're not looking away. And I sometimes try to ignore it. I do sometimes like I will make eye contact and I will smile or I'll wave or I'll do something to kind of like zap them out of it. And usually that works and they kind of like wave and move on. Thankfully, I have gotten some comments like, what are you doing? What is this? Or is this for a project? Someone wanted to ask me if I was a student and I was doing an art project. And I was like, well, thank you. I'm so flattered that you think I could be that age. And no one's too old to be a student, but no, this is just for fun, just for me. And it is fun. Yeah. So I would say the looks are the worst part. If people are going to make sort of a rude-ish comment, they tend to, kind of sugarcoat it. They say like, oh, this is cool. Like, what are you doing? Or, I do actually get people offering to help me a lot. In these more crowded places, people saying, oh, can I take the picture for you? And I say, thank you, but no, I'm good. And it is hard to feel people's eyes on me and feel like they're judging me. And I mean, they are kind of by definition objectifying me by just staring at me, creating my work. And that's really hard and something that I've had to just work through because there's nothing I can do about it. It's a free world. If anyone wants to go to the local park that happens to be near my house, they're of course more than welcome to do that. And I hope that they see me doing my work and they say, oh, that was so interesting. And maybe it sparks a conversation on the way home. I hope at the very least I've caused them to think or to see the world differently or to second guess their judgments. But I do get the sense that a lot of people see me, wearing a dress. People comment on my dresses sometimes. They'll say that's really pretty or, oh, you look like a princess or you look whatever. And I, don't have it in me to start a whole conversation about that, about why you maybe shouldn't just like go up to a stranger and tell her that she looks good in a dress. That's the whole thing. So I really had to toughen up a little bit in those cases. And it used to be really hard for me. It used to just feel so uncomfortable that I would like find a more secluded area, or I would wait till the person walked away. And at this point, I just keep going. I just pose. I just get really in my feelings, and maybe I might even use that as kind of fuel. Like, oh, this person thinks that I'm like just like a model who like cares about my looks, and I hate that. So I'm going to like channel that energy into my posing, and I'm going to, channel that into, like the ferocity, what? I just said a word. So say ferocity, is that a word? Like ferocious?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Well, anyways, I'm going to channel that into the ferocity of my, of my work, of my everything. So in that case, it's nice. It's helpful. It's like, thanks for the boost, but please don't come back. So yeah, it's hard. Thankfully, my family and friends are generally a bit more accepting, even if they don't understand. If they have those judgments, they keep them to themselves, which I appreciate. But it's hard kind of knowing or wondering if people are thinking kind of judgmental thoughts about me or objectifying thoughts about me, and I can't help what people think. All I can do is not let them change the way that I create.
I love that. Yeah, the closest thing I have to that I think almost all of my friends experience at one point or another is, 9 times out of 10, I'm out there with a telephoto lens, right? Looking at stuff, and inevitably there's someone who comes up and they're like, "Oh, what do you see out there? What are you photographing? Like, is it an elk or is it a bear? Like, what do you see?" And it's like, it's just a tree, like I'm just photographing that tree, or like, yeah, I'm just photographing that mud right there. You see the mud, right? And they're like, "What? You're photographing mud?"
That's the best. Oh, the worst one I get is, wow, it's really amazing how nice of a picture you can get with a fancy camera.
Oh,
I'm like,
of course.
well, screw you too. That's what? No.
Yeah. So
I could take this picture with an iPhone and it would still be beautiful.
So the thing around what you were just describing in terms of like people's reactions, I think is largely driven by, and again, painting with a big brush, but I feel like it's largely driven by kind of like this, ever since Instagram and influencers and all that, like this culture that's emerged around kind of like meism, like look at me, I'm
Yes.
everyone has this obsession of getting a selfie of themselves everywhere they go. Yeah, and I'll never deny this, but I mean, I'm a cynic. So, when I see that stuff, my first reaction is like, okay, they want the attention. They thrive on the fact that they're going to post this, and like all of these people are going to be like, oh my gosh. And so, which is fine. Like, we're all human. Like, we thrive on, like, we all need attention, right? Like, it's something photographers struggle with constantly, right? Like, we're constantly doing stuff with our photography so that it can be seen and noticed. So I think that's a normal human thing to do, and kind of gets back to this authenticity thing around like, or maybe
like,
just,
does that feel real to you? And I actually would, if there are any scantily clad influencers or any other kind of influencer listening to this conversation, I actually would really like to know, does it feel authentic to do that? I'm truly asking.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I had another experience very similar to this fall, actually. My buddy and I were camped at this roadside camp spot that we found right next to this creek, and fall colors all around us. And this like rented camper van pulls up, and a Subaru. And the Subaru had this super well-known Instagram photographer that was following these two Australian women in their 20s, bikinis. I mean, it's like 45 degrees outside, like it's fall. They get out, and like he's taking their picture in front of the van, in front of the fall color, right in our campsite, right? Like,
Interesting.
and it was just like the most surreal experience, because it's like, first of all, does anyone actually believe like you're gonna wear that clothing in Colorado in fall? Yeah. So, it's just like that whole culture is just inundating us constantly on Instagram and social media. And I think to a large degree, a lot of people are just kind of tired of seeing that kind of fake representation of life,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, it is hard when you phrase it like that. My immediate thought is, yes, it's hard as somebody who's intentionally trying to not do that. And also, I acknowledge that I do wear dresses in my photos, and that does seem adjacent to, if not to some people, the same as this influencer culture. And the reason that I started wearing dresses initially was because, like I said, I didn't really give much thought to what I was wearing before. When I was in high school and college, I kind of would like wear sweatpants or wear, literal pajamas or, anything I had. And I started kind of feeling like I wanted to take myself more seriously as a photographer. I wanted to make art that I would be proud to have hang on somebody's wall. And in order to do that, my clothing had to be a part of the art. It couldn't just be like, oh, well, what I had on was jeans, so I'm going out in jeans, I guess. What I had on was a t-shirt that says like caps on it. I don't know. I'm from the DC area. Like I'm going to like go out in that. If my mom's listening, I'm actually not a hockey fan, so she's going to be like, why did you say that? You don't wear caps clothes. And I had to kind of try to be intentional about it. And to me, I love the way that wind interacts with dresses, especially specific materials. I love the way that light interacts with like just like a large swath of fabric. I think it's really beautiful. And I just came to really appreciate that part of the art. And then again, last week or something, I went out and I put on a bodysuit, right? Like I'm not tied to the idea of dresses. It's just easy and they're portable and I can wear them over layers of warm clothing. Yeah. So it is hard to have to explain verbally why I do this when somebody else might be saying, well, I do it for the likes and the money. And it's like, that's not why I'm here. I don't know. Yeah, it is really interesting. It's like a very fine line, I think, that's hard to differentiate maybe to an outsider.
Well, and I think that's where it's important, to pay attention to things like artist statements or like when you go to your website, like you're very clear about kind of what the purpose of your art is and your process. And so I think that's how you can differentiate yourself. All right. Wow. So that was fun. Last question I have for you. Who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are a couple of people that our listeners should know about?
Yeah, good question. I love building community with photography. So I'm happy to talk about some other photographers who I think are amazing. The first is one of my very dear friends from high school. Her name is Katie Lingen. She's a wedding photographer who also I know, she likes to do travel stuff and she's very talented. And she and I began our photography journeys around the same time in high school. We were in class together. We did, self-portraits together. Like we really kind of like grew up together as far as being artists and then kind of have taken our own paths. But she's just a badass and has just, I think, a really inspirational story and is really talented and really passionate about what she does. And I hope you cut this out, but like, I know she's a wedding photographer and like, maybe that's not your jam, but also she is a talented, like travel photographer and just like a really cool human. And I think you would enjoy your conversation with her. So that's my plug for Katie.
Well, I've actually recorded several episodes with people that fit that mold, so it's all good.
Great. Okay. Amazing. The other person I would recommend, interestingly, is somebody who I met through Katie, but now lives in Seattle. So I've seen her, we've like met in person, even though our mutual friend lives across the country. But her name is Van. I will not try to pronounce her last name because it's very hard to say and I've never asked how to say it. She is a really talented and creative elopement photographer in Washington. And she, just has like a really cool energy. It's kind of hard to explain, but when you get to know her, she just has this like magnetic sort of energy that makes you want to be her friend instantly. And she's so talented and she is really, really committed to photography and also knows all the best places in the state of Washington and probably around the world to photograph. So yeah, I think that she's an excellent person to be on the show and you guys would have a fantastic time together. And that's all I got. I was done. I'm done.
I love it. Well, Sara, this has been really fun and thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty and for telling us all about your approach to making photographs.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. I had a great time. This is so much fun. And I kind of wish we could keep talking for several more hours about all the little conversations that we kind of started and had to not continue. So yeah, this is great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for joining me for another great episode. A huge thank you to Sara Kushner for sharing her journey and insights into the art of self-portrait photography. Her story is such a powerful reminder of how photography can serve as both a creative outlet and a tool for personal growth. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you to subscribe to my newsletter at mattpaynephotography.com. It's the best way to stay updated on new podcast episodes, photography tips, industry news, and lots more. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd also love your support on Patreon at patreon.com/fstop and listen. Every contribution helps keep the show going and allows me to bring you incredible guests like Sara every week. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.